The rain pounded hard against Manhattan that night. The city lights glowed through the storm, but the streets felt dangerous. Most people stayed inside, hiding from the thunder and the darkness. Prisco Rossi stepped out of the underground club. He had been negotiating for 3 hours straight. His face looked calm, but his eyes were still cold. Everyone in New York knew him, the Mafia boss who controlled the underground empire that moved millions in silence. But he was also the man no woman could reach. Many tried. Socialites, models, even the daughters of rival crime families. But Prisco always said the same thing. Love is a liability in my world. To him, love was death. Power, control, and survival were all that mattered. He wiped the blood from his knuckles with a handkerchief and headed toward the luxury high-rise across the rain-soaked street. His polished shoes clicked against the wet pavement. The doorman nodded nervously as Prisco entered the marble lobby. He pressed the button for the elevator. The gold doors slid open, empty and waiting. Then he heard footsteps behind him. A woman rushed through the lobby, her heels echoing, her breath coming fast. She wore a tailored blazer and carried a leather briefcase. Her dark curls were damp from the rain. She looked exhausted but determined. "Hold the elevator, please," she called out. Prisco hesitated. He hated sharing space. But something about her voice made him press the button to hold the doors. She slipped inside just before they closed, flashing him a grateful smile. "Thank you. Long night." He said nothing. Just nodded once and turned to face the doors. The elevator began to rise. Silence filled the small metal box. Prisco noticed her reflection in the polished steel. She was beautiful, composed, professional. Sarah Wells, though he did not yet know her name. She glanced at the tattoo creeping up his neck and the hardness in his profile. Something about him felt dangerous. Then the elevator lurched. Sarah gasped. The lights flickered. A grinding sound filled the air, metal scraping against metal. The floor dropped suddenly and they both grabbed the rails. Sparks exploded outside the glass panel. The emergency brake screamed. The elevator jerked to a violent stop, throwing them both against the wall. The lights went out. Emergency red lights blinked on, casting shadows across their faces. They were suspended between the 42nd and 43rd floors, trapped in a crashing elevator. Prisco straightened, his jaw tight. He had survived bullets, betrayals, and wars. But this was different. He was not in control. Sarah steadied herself and immediately reached for the emergency phone. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was calm when she spoke to the operator. "We need rescue." The elevator stopped between floors. "How long?" The voice crackled back. 3 hours. Maybe more. The storm damaged the system. Stay calm. 3 hours. Prisco looked at the woman beside him. He did not scream. She did not beg. She just took a breath, closed her eyes for a moment and nodded to herself. When she opened them again, she met his gaze without fear. "Looks like we're stuck together." Prisco almost walked away emotionally, retreating into the cold shell he lived in. He hated being trapped. He hated vulnerability. But something made him stay present. Something in her calm strength reminded him of a life he had buried long ago. He leaned against the wall and spoke for the first time. "You're not panicking." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Panicking won't get us out faster." For the first time in a decade, Prisco felt something crack inside him. Curiosity. Respect. Something human. He watched her closely as the rain hammered against the building outside and the emergency lights flickered. In that broken elevator, suspended between life and death, Prisco Rossi's carefully controlled world began to shift. And he had no idea that the woman standing beside him would become the only thing worth dying for. If you're already hooked by Prisco and Sarah's dangerous love story, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are you team love conquers all, or team walk away while you still can? Let's go. The elevator groaned like a dying animal. Metal shrieked against metal as the cables above them snapped one by one. Sarah's briefcase flew across the floor. Prisco's hand shot out instinctively, gripping the rail as the floor dropped from beneath them. They were falling. 13 floors in 3 seconds. Sarah's scream caught in her throat. The emergency brake engaged with a bone-rattling jolt that threw them both against the wall. Sparks exploded through the glass panel, showering the small space with orange light. Then everything stopped. The silence was deafening except for the hum of the emergency power and their ragged breathing. Prisco pushed himself upright first, his body trained to recover quickly from shock. He assessed the situation with the same cold calculation he used in every dangerous moment of his life. They were alive. The elevator had stopped. They were trapped. His eyes moved to the woman beside him. She was pressed against the corner, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her dark eyes wide. But she was not crying. She was not screaming. She was thinking. Sarah's hands trembled as she smoothed down her blazer and picked up her briefcase. She noticed him watching her and met his gaze. His eyes were darker than she expected, almost black in the red emergency lighting. The tattoo on his neck was clearer now, intricate lines that disappeared beneath his collar. There was something about the way he stood, the way he moved, that set off every instinct she had. This man was dangerous. Not the kind of dangerous that came from wealth or arrogance. The kind that came from violence. Prisco studied her with the same intensity he used to read his enemies. She was beautiful, yes, but that was not what held his attention. It was the way she composed herself. The way she took a breath, squared her shoulders and reached for the emergency phone without hesitation. Most people would have fallen apart by now. Most people would have begged him for reassurance. But Sarah Wells did not beg. She spoke into the phone, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This is Elevator 7 in the East Tower. We've had a cable failure. We're trapped between floors 42 and 43. 2 passengers. No injuries." She listened, nodded, then hung up. When she turned to face him, her expression was calm. "They said 3 hours minimum. The storm damaged the backup systems." Prisco said nothing at first. He just watched her. Watched the way she refused to let fear control her. Watched the way she stood tall even though she had to be terrified. Something stirred inside him, something he had not felt in years. It was not desire, though she was stunning. It was not pity because she clearly did not need it. It was respect. And beneath that, something more dangerous. Curiosity. A crack in the armor he had built around his heart. "You're handling this well," he said finally, his voice low and rough. Sarah met his eyes without flinching. "Falling apart won't get us out of here any faster." For the first time in a decade, Prisco Rossi smiled. Just barely. Just enough. The minutes crawled by like hours. Sarah sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, her legs stretched out in front of her. Prisco remained standing at first, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the doors as if he could force them open through sheer will. But after 20 minutes of silence broken only by the occasional creak of metal, he lowered himself to the opposite wall. They sat facing each other in the dim red light, 2 strangers trapped in a metal coffin suspended between earth and sky. Sarah spoke first. She always did when silence became too heavy. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Wells." She did not extend her hand. The space between them felt too charged for casual gestures. "Prisco," he said simply. No last name. No explanation. She nodded as if she had not expected more. "Bad night to work late. Bad night to be alive," he replied, his tone flat but not unkind. Sarah laughed softly, surprising herself. "I was supposed to be home 3 hours ago. But there's always one more contract to review, one more case to prepare. My boss says if I want to make partner, I have to prove I want it more than anyone else." She looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of her briefcase. "I'm the only black woman in the firm. So I have to be twice as good. Twice as dedicated. Twice as perfect." Prisco watched her as she spoke. He did not interrupt. He did not offer empty reassurances. He just listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. She told him about the late nights, the condescending comments disguised as compliments, the constant pressure to prove she belonged in rooms where people looked at her like she was a mistake. She told him because the darkness made it easier. Because they might die here. Because he was a stranger who would forget her face the moment they were rescued. But Prisco would not forget. He knew that already. "You're strong," he said when she finished. It was not a compliment. It was an observation. Fuck. Sarah met his eyes. "I have to be." He nodded slowly. "Strength is the only thing that matters in this world." Before she could respond, the elevator shuddered violently. The metal groaned. The floor tilted. Sarah gasped as gravity shifted, and instinctively, Prisco lunged forward. His hand caught her arm, pulling her toward him as the elevator swayed. She collided against his chest, her fingers gripping his jacket. The world steadied. The elevator settled. But neither of them moved. Their faces were inches apart. Sarah could feel the heat of his breath, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She saw something there she had not expected. Not coldness. Not calculation. Something human. Something raw and unguarded. Fear perhaps. Or recognition. Prisco saw her fear too, but beneath it he saw her strength. The way she refused to break even now. The way she looked at him not with gratitude but with understanding, as if she could see past the monster everyone else saw. As if she could see the man he had buried a lifetime ago. Neither of them spoke. But in that moment, suspended between life and death, something shifted. Something neither of them could name. Something neither of them could stop. The sound of hydraulics and voices echoed through the elevator shaft. Rescue had finally arrived. The emergency crew pried open the doors, flooding the dark space with light. Paramedics reached in, helping Sarah to her feet. She stumbled slightly, her legs stiff from hours of sitting, but she refused the wheelchair they offered. Prisco stepped out behind her, his expression unreadable, his posture calm as if he had not just spent 3 hours trapped between floors. The lobby was chaos. Building management, firefighters, concerned residents crowding around. Sarah collected her briefcase and smoothed down her blazer, trying to restore some semblance of professionalism. Before she walked away, she turned back. Prisco stood apart from the crowd, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. She offered him a small smile. "Thank you for keeping me calm." He nodded once. Just once. But his eyes followed her as she disappeared into the crowd, weaving through the paramedics and onlookers until she was gone. He stood there longer than he should have, watching the space where she had been, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Something he could not name. Something he did not want. Prisco returned to his penthouse on the 58th floor. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glittering below him like scattered diamonds. He poured himself a drink, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows and told himself to forget her. She was nobody. A stranger who happened to be in the wrong elevator at the wrong time. He had more important things to think about. The Volkov situation. The shipment coming in from the docks. The meeting with his uncle tomorrow. But her voice kept echoing in his mind. Her calm strength. The way she had looked at him without fear. The way she had shared pieces of herself with a stranger in the dark. He could still feel the weight of her in his arms when the elevator shook, still see the way her eyes had searched his face for something human. He cursed under his breath and pulled out his phone. One call. That was all it took. His contact in the city's database owed him a favor. "Sarah Wells," Prisco said into the phone. "I need everything." 20 minutes later, the information came through. Sarah Wells, 29, corporate lawyer at Bennett and Cross, specializing in contract law and mergers. Top of her class at Columbia. No criminal record. No family in New York. She lived alone in a modest apartment in Brooklyn and worked 70-hour weeks. Prisco should have stopped there. But he kept reading. And then he saw it. Bennett and Cross was currently handling the merger for Meridian Holdings, a real estate development company. What the file did not say, but what Prisco knew from his world, was that Meridian Holdings was a front. The Volkovs were using it to launder money through property acquisitions. Which meant Sarah's firm was caught in the middle of a war she knew nothing about. Which meant Sarah was in danger. Prisco set down his phone and stared out at the city. He should walk away. She was not his problem. But the image of her face in the elevator, her strength, her refusal to break would not leave him. For the first time in years, Prisco Rossi made a decision that had nothing to do with power or profit. He would protect her. Even if she never knew. Even if it cost him everything. Sarah was not stupid. She had not survived in a cutthroat law firm by ignoring patterns. The men who had been following her for days suddenly disappeared. The threatening phone calls to the office stopped. The suspicious car parked outside her building vanished overnight. At first she thought it was coincidence. Then she thought maybe building security had stepped up. But when she reviewed the security footage from her apartment building, requesting it under the guise of a safety concern, she saw him. Prisco. Standing in the shadows across the street at 2 a.m, watching her window like a ghost. She remembered his face from the elevator. Those dark eyes. The way he had caught her when the world tilted. She had thought about him more than she cared to admit, wondered if he had thought about her too. But this was not romance. This was surveillance. And Sarah Wells did not tolerate being watched. She found him 2 nights later. It was not hard. A man like Prisco Rossi had a reputation that echoed through the city if you knew where to listen. He owned a club in the meatpacking district, the kind of place where deals were made in back rooms and questions were never asked. Sarah walked past the line of people waiting to get in, ignored the bouncer's protest and pushed through the black doors. The music was deafening. The lights were low. And there, at a private table in the corner surrounded by men in expensive suits, sat Prisco. He saw her before she reached him. His eyes locked onto hers across the crowded room, and for a moment, something like surprise crossed his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that cold mask she remembered. He raised a hand and his men stepped back, clearing a path. Sarah walked up to his table, her heart pounding but her face composed. "We need to talk. Now." Prisco stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. He nodded toward a back hallway, away from the music and the crowd. She followed him into a quiet corridor lined with leather and low lighting. The door closed behind them, muffling the noise. They stood facing each other, alone for the first time since the elevator. "You're following me," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "I saw you outside my building. I want to know why." Prisco did not deny it. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I'm protecting you." "From what?" she demanded. "I didn't ask for your protection. I don't need it." "Yes, you do." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Your firm is handling business for people who are very dangerous. You're caught in the middle of something you don't understand, and if I wasn't watching you, you'd already be dead." Sarah's breath caught. She searched his face for a lie but found only brutal honesty. "What people? What are you talking about?" Prisco stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from him. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "The Volkovs. A crime family that makes me look like a saint. They're using your firm to launder money, and anyone who gets in their way disappears. You were being followed. You were being targeted. I made them stop." "I don't need a criminal's protection," Sarah said, but her voice wavered. Prisco's eyes darkened. He leaned in until his face was inches from hers, his voice like gravel. "You don't know what you're caught in the middle of, Sarah. Let me keep you safe or you'll be dead by the end of the month. Your choice." The truth hit her like a fist. She saw it in his eyes. He was not exaggerating. He was not trying to scare her. He was telling her the only reality that mattered. And despite everything she believed, everything she stood for, she knew she needed him. Sarah agreed to his protection on one condition. No more shadows. No more secrets. If she was going to trust him with her life, she needed to understand what she was up against. Prisco hesitated, but something in her eyes, that fierce determination he had seen in the elevator, made him agree. Over coffee in a diner far from her office, he laid it out. The Volkovs were using Meridian Holdings as a shell. Her firm was processing contracts that looked legitimate but were designed to move dirty money through real estate. Sarah was not complicit, but she was a liability. If she discovered the truth or if the Volkovs thought she might talk, she would be eliminated. Sarah listened, her coffee growing cold in her hands. When he finished, she looked at him with those dark, intelligent eyes and asked, "Why are you telling me this? Why do you care what happens to me?" Prisco did not answer. He just paid the bill and told her to never walk home alone again. The next 2 weeks became a strange dance. Prisco coordinated her security with the precision of a military operation. A driver took her to and from work. One of his men, posing as building maintenance, watched her floor. Prisco himself appeared at unpredictable moments, checking in, adjusting plans, always staying close enough to intervene but far enough to maintain distance. Sarah tried to resist the pull she felt toward him, tried to remind herself who he was and what he represented. But it was impossible to ignore the man she was beginning to see beneath the reputation. He was brilliant. She saw it in the way he anticipated problems, the way he read people and situations with a clarity that came from years of surviving in a world where one mistake meant death. He had a dry sense of humor that surfaced when he thought she was not paying attention, a quiet sarcasm that made her smile despite herself. And sometimes when he looked at her, his eyes softened in a way that made her forget to breathe. One evening, after a close call when a Volkov associate had been spotted near her office, Prisco insisted on driving her home himself. They rode in silence, the city lights streaming past the windows. When he pulled up outside her building, Sarah did not move immediately. She turned to face him, studying his profile in the dim light. "Prisco," she said softly. "Why do you really care? You could have walked away after the elevator. You could have let this play out without getting involved. So why?" Prisco's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned to look at her, and the walls he kept so carefully constructed crumbled just enough for her to see the truth. "Because you made me feel human again," he said quietly. "In that elevator for 3 hours I was not a boss or a killer or a strategist. I was just a man trapped with a woman who refused to break. And I have not been able to stop thinking about it since." Before Sarah could respond, before she could reach for him or say anything that would change everything, Prisco looked away. "Get inside. Lock your door. I will have someone watching all night." Then he drove away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with her heart racing and the truth hanging between them like a promise neither of them could keep. Sarah could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. "Because you made me feel human again." She told herself it was impossible. He was a criminal. He was a lawyer. Their worlds were not meant to intersect. But her heart did not care about logic or principles or the carefully constructed life she had built. Her heart only knew that when she was with him, she felt alive in a way she had never felt before. 3 nights later he came to her apartment. It was past midnight. She heard the knock and knew before she opened the door that it would be him. Prisco stood in the hallway, his face shadowed, his expression tense. "There's been movement. The Volkovs are escalating. I needed to make sure you were safe." His voice was rough, strained. He looked like he had not slept in days. Sarah stepped aside. "Come in." He did not think. She just moved. Prisco hesitated in the doorway as if crossing that threshold would change everything. Then he stepped inside and Sarah closed the door behind him. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the air thicker. He stood in her living room, his hands in his pockets, looking out of place among her books and soft furniture. "You should not have let me in," he said quietly. "I know," Sarah replied. She walked toward him, her heart pounding. "But I did anyway." Prisco turned to face her. The distance between them was less than 3 feet, but it felt like a chasm neither of them should cross. "Sarah, I am not a good man. I have done things that would make you run if you knew. You deserve someone who can give you a normal life. Someone who is not constantly looking over his shoulder. Someone who is not me." Sarah stopped inches from him, her eyes searching his face. "What if I do not want normal? What if I want you?" The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and undeniable. Prisco's control, the iron discipline he had maintained for weeks, finally shattered. He reached out, his hands cupping her face, rough from years of violence but gentle as if she were something precious. "Tell me to leave," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Tell me to walk away, Sarah, because if you don't, I won't be able to stop." Sarah's answer was to reach up and pull him closer. Their lips met in a collision of desperate need and reckless abandon, a kiss that tasted like danger and desire and every rule they were breaking. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her against him. Her fingers tangled in his hair. They stumbled backward until her back hit the wall and still they could not get close enough. 2 worlds that should never meet, crashing together with the force of everything they had been denying. When Sarah woke the next morning, the bed beside her was cold. Prisco was gone. But on her nightstand, written on the back of a receipt in sharp, angular handwriting, was a note. "I shouldn't have done that. Stay safe." Sarah held the note in her hands, her chest tight. She should feel regret. He should feel fear. But all she felt was the certainty that neither of them could walk away now. The line had been crossed. And there was no going back. Marco had been watching for weeks. He saw the way Prisco looked at her, the way he dropped everything when she was in danger, the way he had become distracted and soft. Marco had served the Rossi family for 15 years and he knew weakness when he saw it. More importantly, he knew opportunity. The Volkovs had approached him months ago with an offer. Help them take down Prisco and Marco would control New York's underground. All he needed was proof that Prisco was compromised. Sarah Wells was that proof. The photograph was damning. Prisco leaving Sarah's apartment at dawn, his shirt wrinkled, his guard down. Marco delivered it personally to Don Rossi, Prisco's uncle and the true head of the family. The old man studied the image in silence, his face carved from stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold as winter. "Bring him to me. Now." Prisco knew something was wrong the moment he walked into his uncle's estate. The air felt different, charged with violence. Don Rossi sat behind his desk, the photograph placed deliberately in the center. Marco stood in the corner, his expression neutral. "Sit," Don Rossi commanded. Prisco remained standing. His uncle leaned forward, his eyes hard. "You have been compromised. This woman, this lawyer, she has made you weak. You will eliminate her tonight. Personally. Or I will do it myself." The room went silent. Prisco felt something shift inside him, a final wall crumbling. He had spent his entire life following orders, burying his humanity to become the weapon his family needed. But Sarah had reminded him what it felt like to be a man instead of a monster. And he would not destroy that. Not even for the Empire. "No," Prisco said quietly. Don Rossi's face darkened. "No. I won't touch her. She's innocent. She's not part of this world. She became part of it the moment you chose her over your family." Don Rossi stood, his voice rising. "You are weak, Prisco. Love has made you a liability. If you will not handle this, then you are no longer my nephew. You are a dead man." Prisco met his uncle's eyes without flinching. "Then kill me. But you will not touch her." Don Rossi nodded to Marco. "Do it. Kill the woman. Make it painful. Make him watch." Marco smiled and reached for his gun. But Prisco moved first. He lunged across the room, his fist connecting with Marco's jaw before the gun cleared the holster. They crashed into the bookshelf with splintering. Marco swung wildly, catching Prisco's ribs. Pain exploded through his chest, but Prisco did not stop. He drove Marco back, blow after blow, fueled by desperation and rage. Marco pulled a knife. Prisco caught his wrist, twisted, and drove the blade into Marco's throat. Blood sprayed across the floor. Marco collapsed, gurgling, dying. Prisco stood over him, breathing hard, his hands covered in blood. He had just killed his second in command. He had just committed treason against his own family. Don Rossi watched from behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "You chose her," the old man said finally. "Now you will both pay the price." Prisco turned and ran. He had one priority now. Get to Sarah before his uncle's men did. Everything else, the empire, the power, the life he had built, was already gone. Prisco reached Sarah's apartment in minutes, breaking every traffic law. He found her packing files into her briefcase, preparing for another long day at the office, completely unaware that death was coming for her. "We have to go. Now." His voice was raw, urgent. Sarah looked up and saw the blood on his shirt, the wild desperation in his eyes. She did not ask questions. She just grabbed her bag and followed him. The safe house was a cabin 2 hours north of the city, hidden in the woods where his uncle's reach was limited but not absent. Prisco spent the night fortifying it, checking weapons, preparing for the war he knew was coming. Sarah watched him move with lethal efficiency, finally seeing the full truth of who he was. A killer. A strategist. A man who had survived by being harder and colder than everyone else. But when he looked at her, she saw something else. Fear. Not for himself but for her. Don Rossi arrived at dawn with 6 men. They came not with stealth but with purpose, their cars pulling up to the cabin like a funeral procession. Prisco stepped outside alone, his hands visible, no weapons drawn. Sarah stood in the doorway behind him, refusing to hide. Don Rossi walked forward, stopping 10 feet away. His face was carved from stone, aged and weathered by decades of violence. "You killed Marco. You betrayed your family. Give me one reason I should not end this now." Prisco met his uncle's eyes without flinching. "I spent my whole life being the monster you wanted. I buried every piece of myself that was human so I could be the weapon this family needed. I rejected love, connection, weakness. I became exactly what you made me." His voice grew stronger, steadier. "But she made me want to be a man again. She reminded me that there is more to life than power and fear. Kill me if you want, but I will not let you touch her. I would rather die standing for something real than live another day as your monster." The silence stretched. Don Rossi studied his nephew, truly looked at him for the first time in years. He saw something he thought Prisco had lost long ago. Conviction. The kind of strength that came not from fear but from love. Slowly, Don Rossi lowered his weapon. You are not weak, Prisco. You are stronger than I ever was. I spent my life taking things. You found something worth dying for. That is power I never understood. He took a step back. You can leave. Take your woman and go. I guarantee your safety and hers, but you can never return to this life. You are no longer a Rossi. Do you accept? Prisco did not hesitate. Yes. Months later, Spring returned to New York. Prisco and Sarah walked through Central Park hand in hand, the sun warming their faces. Prisco had started a legitimate security firm, using his skills to protect instead of destroy. Sarah had made partner at a different firm, one untainted by the shadows of her past. They had built a life together, piece by piece on their own terms. Prisco pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. You saved me in that elevator. Sarah smiled, her eyes bright. No. We saved each other. And that's how a cold mafia boss found the one thing more powerful than his empire, love worth dying for. If this story gave you chills, you need to see what happens next. Click that next video right now for another heart-stopping romance that will leave you breathless. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.